Hello, friends, and welcome back to One More Thing Before I Go, a podcast that celebrates the extraordinary lives of everyday people. And this month, the way we're doing that is by walking you through a little bit about the Enneagram. It's a way that helps us type ourselves a little bit, learn how we tick, learn why we tick, and maybe how to break out of those things to become a more whole and complete person. This is week 2. If you missed last week, I really encourage you to go back and start with that one. It'll help fill in the gaps as we go. Also, as a reminder, this is a question and answer series, so the more questions you send in, the more I'm able to deal specifically with the things that come up in your life, and I don't have to guess. So it's really in everyone's best interest to keep sending those questions in. I'll do my best to answer them. And as you'll hear today, sometimes I'll say, I don't know. Sometimes I'll give you a short answer and a long answer. Whatever seems to fit, I'll do my best. We'll figure this out together. Well, I don't want to waste any more time. Let's jump right into it. Episode 2 of That Thing About the Enneagram. The first question I wanted to deal with was sent in a few weeks ago. Here it is. The Enneagram is obviously a helpful list of common personality patterns for comparison and discussion, but how are any claims beyond that backed up? So here you go. In terms of science or statistical claims, it has to be said that, like in any personality or psychological typing system, your mileage may vary. But I like to point detractors of this or any other typing mechanism to the statement from famous British mathematician and statistician George Box, which is simply, all models are wrong. He elaborates that since all models are wrong, we're not going to find any one model that is, quote, correct, and no amount of excessive explanation about any one in particular is going to change that. And second, since all models are wrong, the most important things to be aware of are exactly what might be wrong. In Box's words, it is inappropriate to be concerned about mice when there are tigers abroad. And that's kind of the deal, I think, for the Enneagram. It may not always be perfect at being able to predict or even type behavior, but it also never claims to. I'll get back to this in a minute because I think it's important for another reason. But first, back to Box. He says that we can't really ask the question, is the model true? Because it either contains varying truth or is absolutely true. And then he gives some fun explanation related to ideal gases versus actual gases to support his claim that if truth is a model meant to be the whole truth, then the answer will always be no. So he says the only real question of interest is the model illuminating and useful? And to this, I would say wholeheartedly, the Enneagram is both, and is so in a way that none of the other typing systems I've studied comes close to. So there you have it. George Box summarizes it this way. All models are wrong, but some are useful. The Enneagram might not be perfect or foolproof or tick off every box in any one person's mental checklist for what a typing system must have to be viable, but it's extremely illuminating and very useful. Here's why. First, every personality system I've ever seen wants to help people understand who they are and how they behave. They're a way of helping predict responses to certain situations and allowing people to potentially see those scenarios coming and choosing to change their behaviors to go against their type. Those systems also help us categorize other people so we can also start to predict their actions and reactions as well as our own. Some type systems go a step further and start to place us into various categories that help us differentiate between particular cognitive processes. Do I prefer theoretical or practical approaches? Am I typically objective or subjective? Am I extroverted or introverted? Do I trend toward observing or deciding? And that's helpful to an extent as well, both for myself and others. We're all wired differently. No one type is either good or bad or even best, but it's helpful to surround ourselves with people who supplement our deficiencies and make our groups and organizations more well-rounded, while also realizing that certain people will require a much more nuanced approach to how to interact and communicate with them based on their own preferences. Great. So we have a way of looking at behavior, decision-making processes, and preferred ways of communicating. and we're told that most of this is locked in and will change very little over time. But what I always wanted to know was, why? Why is behavior often so predictable that situations often play out like a bad movie script to the super observant? Why is it that when scenarios A, B, and C happen, my reaction pretty much is the same? Why is it so hard to choose another way of acting and behaving consistently so that it becomes second nature? Why is it that there's so many things in my life that I desperately want to stop doing or saying, but I keep going back to the same things over and over again, even though I hate it every time it happens? Or why is it that there's so many things that I say I want to do, say I want to accomplish, and I never get around to it? The answer is that all these things are symptoms. Behaviors, decisions, reactions, communication style. And any good doctor is going to tell you that you can continue to treat the symptoms and hope to minimize your problems. But the only way to really cut away at the issue with any hope for permanent change is by finding and dealing with the source of the problem. This is what the Enneagram is good for. And this is why I said it's both illuminating and useful. Because the Enneagram at its core is designed to help you identify what motivates you, what causes you to do what you do and say what you say. It's the why to all of the what. It helps you realize where your heart is, not just your head and your body. The long-time term for each type's motivation within the Enneagram is known as your passion. Essentially, it's what drives you and sometimes even consumes you, the unconscious motivation behind most of what you do. In the religious community, we have another word for it: sin, specifically your pet sin. The Enneagram model says that every person began to experience at a very young age that certain behaviors would reward them in some way with the thing they wanted most. Typically, that falls into one of three categories. We all truly want three things in life: to feel safe, to feel wanted, and to feel like you're in charge of your own life. This is why we begin experimenting very early with acting against authority, yet run back to those same figures for comfort when things go wrong. One child might realize that always doing exactly what you're told will keep them from ever receiving punishment. Another might decide that putting on cute performances or talking with silly voices gets them the attention that they otherwise were lacking. Others could find their situation so overbearing or complicated that their best reaction is to hide away and unplug, or to find some fictional fantasy escape in which to invest themselves, since their current real-life situation isn't something they know how to deal with. There could be any number of instances, singular or repeated, which contribute to this. But eventually, this becomes how we deal with the world around us. We build our walls, we wear our masks, and we dutifully begin going about our lives repeating the questions: am I safe? Am I wanted? Am I in control? We continue navigating the labyrinth of life, fortifying those walls and adding modifications to our masks, with those things constantly embedded in our subconscious. Until one day, we're an adult, and our coping mechanisms that work to help us survive as a child have kept us locked in childlike behavior. Here we get to the heart of what the Enneagram is hoping to do. Unlike any other personality profiling system I've seen, the Enneagram says, this is your starting point, this is what you're working with. You realize now that you've been living as only part of a person for all of this time, and it's time to grow up. Now it's time to do the work. Now the real journey begins. Because the secret of the Enneagram is not to run to your special corner of a cornerless circle and hide out in what makes you special. The secret of the Enneagram is in realizing we're all 9 types, and where we're trying to get to is the center, where we're equal parts of all types, and can rightly judge in a situation the proper way to behave, react, think, and communicate, because we have a firm grasp of who we are and can better check our motivations along the way. For anyone who takes an Enneagram test or workshop, figures out their number, and then sits on the information as a, well, now I know, or worse still, uses it to justify their behavior, I would honestly recommend that you just forget you knew about the Enneagram at all. Go back to your other personality tools and classifications. But if you're ready to put in the work of breaking free of the walls you've built up around you and removing the masks you force yourself to wear, then the Enneagram is for you. I'm sorry if I can't quantifiably back up claims beyond that I've seen the results of people who continue to put in the work, including in my own life, and it's provided such a hope for a pathway forward. It can be a reminder that this is who I've become, but it's not who I was created to be. It can be a stepping stone for healing from past hurts and development for future growth. It's a way to stop our downward spirals dead in their tracks because we begin to recognize the telltale signs of our passions or sins manifesting and allows us to step back and say, what if I take a different path this time? Look, there's nothing magical about it. I know I may be describing it in a way that sounds like it. There's wisdom behind it, backed by developmental psychology. Things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs all fall into this. And it's infused with, if you're like me, a lifelong desire to pursue my creator on his terms, not on my own. And just like in any other personal development system, whether that's going to see a therapist, dieting, working out, or simply setting goals for the future, the secret is in working hard based on what you know and what you do in order to become a better version of yourself. No amount of self-realization is going to result in anything different happening unless you commit to change. And you succeed sometimes, and you fail other times. But when you fail, you pick yourself up and go at it again, knowing that you're hopefully better from it. Is the Enneagram perfect? No. Is it meant to be? No. But is it illuminating and useful? Absolutely. All right, I'm going to tackle the next two questions together because they really seem to fit. One is, must everyone have exactly one of those 9 types as a primary match? And the next question that goes right along with it, could other descriptions be added to those 9? So first, let's back up for a minute. Some of you who are listening and hearing the term Enneagram talked about for the first time, you have no idea what that is. Enneagram is simply a combination of Greek words, ennea meaning 9 and gram meaning picture. It's a diagram that shows you 9 different types. And the theory is that you fall into one of these 9 different categories. So when the question asks, can you be more than one type, or are there more types than just 9? That's what they're asking about. If you want to learn more about the 9 types, I'd encourage you to pause this podcast, go back to last week's. I spent quite a bit of time, nearly an hour, breaking down each of the 9 types, the triads. So if those words are unfamiliar to you, go back, listen to that, get a good baseline for what we're talking about, and possibly even along the way determine what your type is. And then come back here and these questions will make a little bit more sense to you at that point. So at its core, I think this is what the question is really asking. Why 9? Why not 8? Why not 4? Why not 22? And the answer I have to give you is, I'm not really sure. I don't think anybody's entirely certain, other than the fact that there is a baseline way back in ancient Greece for this pattern. Somebody decided to start developing it. And you have to start somewhere and you have to stop somewhere. Beyond that, a bigger explanation is, again, if you listen to last week, the patterns, the passions, the sins that we encounter really do fall into something as old as what Catholics, religious communities tend to call the deadly sins. And there's 7 of those. What they've done is taken those 7 and then expand. So in addition to gluttony, sloth, wrath, pride, envy, greed, and lust, then they added deception or deceit and fear or anxiety. So it's easy to take a look at them, and if you're looking at the positive side of things, you're looking at descriptions of personality traits. You could say, yeah, why is there 9? Why do I have to have 9? Couldn't I be a mix of both of these things? Is it possible that I'm none of these things because there's multiple numbers that ring slightly true, but they're all a little bit hollow? Yes, that's the problem I have with the 4 boxes that we see all the time. And even Myers-Briggs has 16 boxes that it tosses you into. At least they discuss it more in terms of preferences. But here we have what seems like a very small number of boxes to put ourselves in. But if you understand the way the Enneagram works, it's a lot more about understanding the boxes that we put ourselves into and the caricatures that we've become, the stereotypes that we've taken on. And so it has a lot less to do with being forced into a box that we're not, and a lot more to do with understanding that we put ourselves in a box and we should spend less time trying to develop that box and more time trying to break out of it. which is why, again, the focus for me is on that shadow side, the darkness, the sin that we need to work on in order to become more whole. Which brings me to the next idea that a lot of people don't really talk about. They want you to focus on finding your type and then understanding how to break out of it, understanding how to develop it better, whatever it is that their focus is. And I tell people when I walk them through it, I honestly don't care if you never figure out what your Enneagram type is. That's a journey for you. That's not a journey for me. If it doesn't happen, that's fine. If it doesn't happen for years, that's fine. What you can still do as you walk through the process and continue the journey is to continue working on yourself, to continue becoming a better person. Because honestly, we all struggle with all 9 of these sins. It wouldn't be that hard for me to look at the circle and say, yep, I'm a 1 today. Yep, I'm a 2 today. Man, I've been acting like a 7 today, because I struggle with all of those things from time to time. It may not be every day, which is why when we're identifying what our type is, the real secret to figuring out what is my biggest struggle is, which of these sins do I tend to gravitate to the most? Which of them drives me to make all the rest of the decisions that I make? Which of them maybe even propels me into the other sins? And for me, I'm a 5. So that avarice, that greed, the withholding mentality is the thing that controls my waking moments if I let it. So I can convince myself that I don't have enough emotional capacity to handle a particular situation, to have the conversation that I'm supposed to have, to go and do the things that I am supposed to be doing. And so I will fall into some of the other sins as a result. I can overindulge in things that I think are going to make me happier instead. I can be extremely apathetic and lazy and slothful. I can take on so many of these other things. I can become so introspective and look around at all of the highly functioning people around me and become envious of them. There's so many of these things. I could become a critical perfectionist like a 1, because, well, the world is broken, I'm broken, there's something that doesn't work. All those things factor in just because of this withholding idea that I don't have enough energy, I don't have enough emotional capacity, I don't have enough love, and so I just need to pull away and become a hermit in order to survive. And what I really need is to engage with the world more fully and engage in better community, healthy community with the people around me, and surround myself with people who aren't going to let me do that. That's growth. That's not always where I am. So I guess to specifically answer the question, yes, you are one particular type. You are one particular number, but as a result of that, you are a combination of all of the types. And both good and bad, as we start to develop, we start to break out of one shell, we may find that we've added on additional layers of defenses, additional masks. And so while we're working on one area of ourselves, we may realize that we're actually living in a different area as well. That doesn't mean that my number is changing. That means I'm becoming more self-aware. I'm starting to realize that I struggle with a lot of things and I've probably buried them for far too long. So what do we do with that? Well, like I said, if you're struggling to figure out what your number is, don't fret, don't worry, take some time. Study each of the types. It's not going to be a waste of your time because, like I said, we struggle with all of the different facets of the passions. We struggle with all these different fears and anxieties and moments of shame, bouts of anger. We struggle with all of them. So to learn more about how to overcome those, that's going to be a good thing in your life. If you never figure out what your type is, it's okay. But if you do, it's going to be simultaneously this freeing moment of, oh, I'm not the only one that's like this. That feels good. And at the same time, like a dagger in your heart of, oh no, I really am like this. And this typing system has pegged me so consistently and so deeply that it's painful to read about this. That's the experience that a lot of people have. that you almost don't want to continue reading. You don't want to continue learning about it because it hurts too much. It's bringing up old wounds. It's reopening old wounds. And now I have to deal with the repercussions of this when my entire life has been trying to repress and trying to push down and trying to block out those things so they never happen again and I don't have to remember them again. That's the journey. So hopefully that answers that question. Yes, you have a particular type. And there's 9 numbers because there's 9 numbers. I don't see that there's a glaring hole in the typing system. I don't see that there's a need for a 10th or 11th sin to be introduced. I think this is pretty complete as it is. And if nothing else, it's 3 groups of 3 things, which makes a nice round 9. So it's a lot easier to describe, to explain to people. You have 3 triads, each of them break down into 3 numbers, and there's so many different things inside of that. One will try to forget, one will try to project on the outside world, one will try to, contain it in the inside world. And so there's a lot of patterns that we see replicating themselves that would only work with this idea of a 9. It's the best answer I can give you. Hopefully that's good enough. And I think that also puts us at a decent stopping point for this week. We've had a lot of theory and a lot of asking why the Enneagram, trying to answer those questions. Next week, unless I get another series of questions that completely turns us on edge, next week we'll talk through what it looks like to integrate and disintegrate, or what we look like when we're healthy versus super stressed. We'll talk about wings, what they are, what they're connected to. Is it possible to have multiple wings? We'll also dive into subtypes and what those mean, and how certain numbers with certain subtypes can look like a completely different number, especially if you don't dig into what's the motivating factor. The behavior will often look completely different. So we'll dig into all those different facets and also try to then answer a question about, when I see the diagram, how are all these numbers connected? Are they connected? Is it just a pretty picture? And so we'll break all those things down next week. I hope you're enjoying this series so far. Please continue to send in your questions and comments, criticisms even, and let us know how we're doing. And if you have any specific questions about the Enneagram and personality types, I would love to hear them and be able to tackle them in a future episode. See you guys soon. This episode of One More Thing Before I Go is sponsored by Anchor.fm. When I first had the idea of making the show, my primary obstacle was deciding which platform to use for my recording, hosting, and distribution. Anchor made it so easy because they do all 3 things and much, much more. It's free. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more platforms. You can make money from your podcast, whether you have 2 listeners or 2,000. It's everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place. All you have to do is download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started today. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. If you like what you heard, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you do your listening. You can even interact with me directly if you go to anchor.fm/One More Thing Podcast. That's the number 1 More Thing Podcast. There you can click on a link to send a voice message. That's a great way to give feedback or let me know if you too would like to be a guest on the show. It's that easy. Special thanks goes out to BigFish_music for providing our theme music and transitions. If you like what you heard, go check him out on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks again for listening to One More Thing Before I Go. Until next time, be good to yourself and be good to others.